Okay, good evening, one and all, and thanks for coming to the last talk of the series Ireland 924. So, as per usual, I will give the talk and a presentation, and I'll follow up with any questions or comments at the end. The 1924 Tailteann Games, or Éineacht Tailteann, was the largest sporting event in the world in 1924, larger even than the Olympic Games in Paris that had just preceded it. It was a marriage of the ancient with the modern, an avenue to show the old Irish nation of antiquity, but very much alive and ready for the world in its new guise as an independent Irish Free State. Today we'll look at why the Tailteann Games were held when they were, what transpired at the Games, and why they were ultimately discontinued after 1932. Thomas H. Nally, in his book, The Éineacht Tailteann and the Tailteann Games, Their History and Ancient Associations, claimed that the far-famed Olympic Games of ancient Greece drew the inspiration from the still much more ancient games in Ireland, not merely the idea of the games, but the actual games themselves, their sequence at the festivities, the rules under which the various contests were held, and even the very bylaws regulating the conduct of the people before, during, and immediately after the celebrations, were all borrowed en masse from those already in operation in this country. While this is a stretch with little evidence to back it up, just as it is to claim the Irish invented chess, the Tailteann Games were initiated centuries ago. Although pinpointing a year or even a century is difficult, some say they started in 1896 BC, others say it was 632 BC. The first Tailteann Games were held to celebrate the life of Queen Tailteann, and here is actress Nancy Rock depicting Queen Tailteann in 1924. They were organised by her stepson, Lug Láv Fada, Lug of the Long Hand, at Tailteann in County Meath. They were staged at Queen Tailteann's burial ground, held at the beginning of August each year, and lasted for a week. At the time, on Éineacht or Fair was a national assembly called by a king to celebrate the funeral rites of the deceased, and was also used to discuss improvements or extensions of the laws of the land. An Éineacht summoned by the High King was of the greatest national importance and was attended by all the minor kings, chiefs and nobles, as well as by vast multitudes of the people from all parts of the 5 provinces. There were 3 main functions of the Éineacht: to honour the dead, to proclaim laws, and finally to entertain people. For the duration of the Éineacht, a truce was declared. According to Nally, the games consisted of athletic, gymnastic and equestrian contests of various kinds, and included running, long jumping, high jumping, hurling, quoit throwing, spear casting, sword and shield contests, wrestling, boxing, swimming, horse racing, chariot racing, spear or pole jumping, slinging contests, bow and arrow exhibitions, and in fact every sort of contest exhibiting physical endurance and skill. There were also literary, musical, oratorical and storytelling competitions, singing and dancing competitions, and tournaments of all kinds, as well as competitions for goldsmiths, jewellers, and artificers in the precious metals, for spinners, weavers, and dyers, and the makers of shields and weapons of war. Naturally, as the name Éineacht suggests, there was a great market or fair where all kinds of food and goods were sold. Another feature of the ancient Tailteann Games was that of matchmaking, where parents would make suitable, and in probably most cases, unsuitable matches for their children. Legend has it that Fionn McCool used the Tailteann Games as a recruiting centre for his famous warriors, the Fianna Éireann, and that St. Patrick gave the Games his blessing in the 5th century. According to Mike Cronin, in its entirety, Éineacht Tailteann was one of the most central events in the calendar of pre-Christian Ireland. It encompassed many themes that would subsequently feature in the Olympic Games and served to mark the cultural, geographical and military independence of Ireland during the period. The Games were held annually until 863 AD, not held for much of the 10th century, and then revitalised in 1006. The last year the ancient Games were reputedly held was in 1169, a very significant year in Irish history. The reigning King of Ireland at the time was Rory O'Connor, the last High King of Ireland, the final independent domestic ruler of Ireland until the 20th century. In the autumn of 1169, not long after Éanach Tailteann had closed, the first Norman invasion took place, and a long and troubled history of British involvement with Ireland began. Paul Rouse describes the ending of the ancient games in 1169, the year of the English invasion, as a decisive demonstration of the negative cultural impact of colonisation. The idea of bringing the Tailteann Games back to life gathered momentum from the late 19th century onwards, due to the Gaelic revival that occurred then as movements such as the Gaelic League and the Gaelic Athletic Association, the GAA, took centre stage. Both of those organisations took inspiration from ancient Ireland, as did many who spearheaded the literary revival at the same time. Figures such as W.B. Yeats, Lady Augusta Gregory, and Douglas Hyde were inspired by the myths and tales from Ireland's ancient past. They were sustained calls for the rebirth of the Tailteann Games by Land League founder Michael Davitt and the first GAA president Maurice Davin, himself a world-class athlete in the 1880s. Following the 1916 Easter Rising, Sinn Féin embraced the idea of holding the Tailteann Games again, with calls for their renewal being declared in the Dáil from 1919. It was not until 1922, though, once independence was achieved for 26 counties, that the dream of holding the Tailteann Games became a realistic prospect. The man central to the reintroduction of the Tailteann Games was Cork-born James Joseph J.J. Walsh, who Paul Rouse has described as driven, dynamic, ambitious, argumentative, arrogant, and an extremely capable man. And here is Walsh sitting with Maud Griffith, his wife Jenny Turner, and Arthur Griffith, watching Cork play Dublin at a Gaelic football match. He was a revolutionary who fought in the GPO during the Easter Rising, as well as being a leading official of the GAA, serving as chairman of Cork GAA County Board. He saw his revolutionary and GAA activities intertwined, writing in his autobiography, Recollections of a Rebel, published in 1944, that he happened to be one of those who realised the potentialities of the GAA as a training ground for physical force. Its national ideals were of the highest, contamination with the alien, and all his works were taboo. With a struggle for world domination in the offing, I was satisfied that we had a nucleus of the material that might one day strike a blow at the ancient foe. In the first Free State government, he was appointed to the Executive Council as Postmaster General. And here is Walsh sitting far left beside Kevin O'Higgins at an Executive Council meeting in 1922. He is credited with rebuilding and developing the Free State's telephone and telegraph services, and was involved in the establishment of the 2RN radio station, a precursor to RTE. Walsh was also a successful businessman. After leaving politics in 1927, he founded a bus company which operated with great success between the city centre and South Dublin. He was also involved in Clondalkin paper mills and was a major investor in Sullus, the dominant bulb manufacturer in Ireland for decades. His reputation has been diminished significantly by his support for Hitler and his involvement in the 1940s Irish fascist political party, Altera Hashirga, architects of the resurrection, which sought a totalitarian Irish Christian corporatist state. It was vehemently against partition, with one of its most famous slogans being 6 counties, 6 divisions, 6 minutes. Make that up what you will. Walsh believed in the Tailteann Games to promote the organisation, cohesion and solidarity of the Gaelic race at home, and in particular abroad. He envisaged that the Games would be open to all Irish-born people and to people of Irish descent from anywhere in the world. With the formation of the provisional government of the Irish Free State in early 1922, Walsh was given approval to stage the Tailteann Games in Dublin in the summer of that year. He announced the programme to Dáil Éireann on 1st of March 1922, an 8-day programme to be held in Dublin from 6th to 13th of August inclusive. While mooted to take place at the time of the Irish Race Convention in Paris in 1921, it was decided instead to bring off this big athletic carnival in Dublin on or about Horse Show Week of the present year, 1922. Walsh claimed the programme went far beyond anything attempted at the Greek Olympiads, which included athletics, cycling, boxing, football, hurling, rounders, handball, rising, and striking the hurling ball, long distance place football, and swimming. For ladies, there was planned to be camogie and rounders competitions. Irish men and women resident in Ireland could participate in fencing, gymnastics, tug-of-war, rowing, motorboats, piper band competition, brass and reed competitions, inter-college athletics, 3,500 metres walk, team revolver and pistol shooting, rifle range, revolver and clay bird shooting, yacht racing, motorcycle racing, and step dancing, amongst others. Given Walsh's involvement with the GAA and his firm belief in the sanctity of the Foreign Games ban rule, no soccer or rugby was included in the programme. On some of the modern twists planned, Walsh said events such as rowing, motorboats and motorcycle racing, yacht racing, step dancing and band competitions are each a part of the social life of the nation, and their introduction will help to vary the attractions of the carnival and give national colour as well as stimulus to these widely divergent forms of public amusement. We see in our games, Walsh went on, through their triennial cycle, the surest means of permanently cementing the scattered units of the Gael, as well as the assertion through this medium, the Greek Olympics, of our national athletic powers. And finally, it is intended that Ireland should be drawn closer to Europe through occasional internationals in the capitals of the continent. Given the climate at the time, as Ireland was hurtling towards civil war, Walsh concluded that as a consequence of the present political difference, it is, I suppose, only natural that suspicions should permeate many non-political activities. I should like it to be understood, however, that the GAA does not meddle in sectional politics. It has always been sufficiently sensible to mind its own business, and on Dáil can rest assured that this will also be my guiding principle in conduct of Éineacht Tailteann. The provisional government granted Walsh £6,000 to begin work on the extensive planning and putting the necessary infrastructure in place. He also successfully convinced the government to provide the GAA with £10,000 to redevelop Croke Park, the stadium that was to be used for the majority of the sporting events. The grant was paid on the understanding that the GAA would allow Croke Park to be used for the opening and closing ceremonies and for other events free of charge during the Games. It was the first of many favourable decisions that Free State governments offered to the GAA in the 1920s and 1930s. Even as the political climate worsened during the spring and early summer of 1922, the Games were still scheduled to take place. Once the fighting started in Dublin on 28th of June, however, with the attack on the forecourts by Free State forces, which heralded the start of the Civil War, it was obvious the Games could not be held in 1922. The organising committee still hung on to hopes of holding the Games. Once the American team that was planning to take part in the Tailteann Games, though, sent a cable saying they would no longer travel due to the disturbed state of affairs, it finally dawned on the committee that the Games had to be cancelled. There was no further prospect of them being held while the state was in conflict. And here are foreign delegates with Walsh who still arrived for the Games. The art competition in the RDS was the only part of the 1922 programme that took place. The actual violence and threat of violence was one reason for their postponement, but so too was the financial cost, all the more pertinent given the enormous financial costs the Civil War burdened on the fledgling state. As Mike Cronin has stated, the real problems caused by the Civil War were creating an understandable financial drain on the government, and grandiose schemes such as Éineacht Tailteann, irrespective of how much ministers believed in the value of the event, meant that funding for a major spectacle was not available. While the Free State government saw the value of the Tailteann Games in projecting an image of Ireland's independence to the world, it was very conscious, particularly its Department of Finance, on costs, and was hesitant to fund the Games at any level considered excessive. Once the Civil War ended in May 1923 and conditions somewhat stabilised thereafter, the Free State government decided to hold the Tailteann Games in August 1924. Despite the passage of time, as Cronin has written, the ethos of the original Games and the political context of 1924 bore similarities. The original Games were held under the terms of a national truce and aimed to celebrate the illustrious dead. The modern Games came a year after the ending of a bloody civil war. The Games, while a celebration of Celtic culture and newly independent Ireland, were also a time of reflection, remembrance, and a signal to move on past old hostilities. In the build-up, there was much focus on the international dimension. At one meeting of the Tailteann Games Organising Committee in December 1923, it was reported that the first consignment of the Tailteann Games and Horse Show booklet, amounting to 25,000, had been shipped to the United States and Canada and would be distributed before Christmas. The remainder of the first edition of 100,000 will be distributed free of charge through the kind offices of the large steamship companies to Australia, South America, South Africa, and other countries. At an event in Belfast in April 1924, to encourage people from the north to come to the opening ceremony and different events, the organisers claimed that international steamship and tourist companies have taken a direct interest in the Games. Bookings from America run to 30,000 already. Special steamers will run from different countries, and cheap excursion rates will be available on all railway lines. Particular attention is being paid to secure reasonable charges at hotels and restaurants, and a central bureau of information is being established. While the Civil War ended in May 1923, thousands of Republicans remained imprisoned or interned afterwards. Many of them went on hunger strike in October 1923 to demand either a release or better conditions. While the strike petered out the following month, most were released by Christmas by the Free State government. There still were almost 2,000 Republicans still incarcerated at the start of 1924. Republicans saw an opportunity to undermine the government by threatening to boycott the Games for as long as internment continued. Cavan-based Farmers Party TD Patrick Baxter put down a motion in the Dáil that the Dáil, cognizant of a return to peaceful and more stable conditions in the country, and aware of the approach of the Tailteann Games with their historic associations of peace and goodwill among Irishmen of all sections, is of opinion that the time has arrived when all untried or sentenced political prisoners should be released, and men who are on the run for political offences be free to return to their homes. The President of the Executive Council, W.T. Cosgrave, replied to the calls for releasing Republican prisoners by saying, "If you are prepared to take the risk, release every one of the prisoners, but do not release them on account of their near approach of the Tailteann Games. Because if you do that, you are rearing yourself in the future, or for other governments, the menace of hostility to any public festivity, public event, great occasion of the sort, and it is too dangerous." Cosgrave was indicating here that he would rather risk disrupting the Tailteann Games than yield to Republican threats. However, there was an acceptance within government circles that the remaining Republicans should be released, which they were in stages. Eamon de Valera was released on 16th of July without much fanfare, one of the last prisoners to be released. And here he is in the centre with Austin Stack to the right, interned in Arbour Hill in early 1924. Before the Tailteann Games commenced, Ireland competed as a separate nationality for the first time at the Paris Olympics in 1924. The International Olympic Committee, the IOC, ruled that Ireland was entitled to do so in 1922. And here is the Irish football team competed at the 1924 Paris Olympics. Irish people had competed in previous Olympic Games, primarily under the British umbrella, but also representing the United States, Canada, and South Africa. Between 1896 and 1920, 36 gold, 31 silver, and 13 bronze medals were won by Irish-born competitors. 1924 was the first occasion Irish athletes could compete solely under the Irish banner, an important symbol of nationhood. Ireland's presence at the 1924 Paris Olympics was largely due to the work of Limerick-born John James J.J. Keane, who became the first Irish member of the IOC in 1922. And here is Keane to the right of Cardinal Joseph McRory at the 1932 Tailteann Games. As chair of the Irish Olympic Council since its establishment in 1920, Keane spearheaded a campaign for Irish athletes to contest as a right for their own country of birth. Crucially, Keane, an avid nationalist, insisted that Ireland, rather than the Irish Free State, should be the unit recognised, highly significant given that most Olympic sports have remained All-Ireland sports following the partition of Ireland. At the opening ceremony on 4th of July 1924, Ireland participated in the Parade of Nations under the name Irlanda. Ireland competed in art, football, athletics, boxing, water polo, and lawn tennis. Ireland was represented by a team of 46 men and 2 women. The 2 women were tennis players, Bea Blair White and Hilda Wallace. Belfast-born athletes represented Ireland in boxing, water polo, and athletics. However, as historian Tom Hunt has pointed out, only the 8 athletes participating in athletic events were in the opening ceremony parade. The footballers had already competed and returned home, while the other competitors had not yet arrived. Overall, Irish competitors did not distinguish themselves in the 1924 Olympics. Poor training and even less funding largely accounted for the poor performance, with the cash-strapped Free State government focusing its sporting budget on the Tailteann Games that took place almost immediately afterwards. The only success achieved in the now defunct art competitions, where Jack B. Yeats won a silver medal for his painting The Liffey Swim, and Oliver St. John Gogarty won a bronze medal for his poem Ode to the Tailteann Games. Gogarty was a surgeon, writer, and senator in the new Free State, who had attended the founding meeting of the Irish Olympic Council 4 years earlier. Ode to the Tailteann Games was commissioned by the Free State government and soon after was sung by a massed 500-member choir at the opening ceremony of the Tailteann Games in Dublin. And here is the choir and conductor performing at the opening ceremony in Croke Park. And here's a short extract from the poem. We are, as our fathers were, lovers of the swift and strong, lovers of the open air, lovers of the horse and song, and the glories of the voice, in the deeds to be retold. Therefore, let us now rejoice, as the kings rejoiced of old. Room enough for pieces here, on the green and shaven swards, for the pitching charioteer, for the grave contending bards, for the young men in the race, for the stately sports of dames, for the maidens fair of face, we have opened Tailteann Games. As Mark Duncan has written, the Tailteann Games were modelled on the Olympics, and the similarities and linkages between the two were striking. Both offered programmes combining athletic events and cultural competitions. Both involved grand opening and closing ceremonies, and both featured at least some of the same competitors. Among the 5,000 Tailteann Game competitors were 6 gold medalists from Paris, including the brilliant American swimmer Johnny Weissmuller, later famous for playing the title role in the Tarzan movies. Competitive entrants to the Games were meant to be restricted to those individuals of Irish birth and those who could lay claim to an Irish heritage. We are still looking for Weissmuller's Irish heritage, however, as we are with some other high-profile competitors. Most competing athletes, though, were Irish-born or from Irish diaspora backgrounds in Australia, Britain, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, and the US. This was, of course, one of the main aims of the Games. Therefore, as Mike Cronin has explained, although Éineacht Tailteann built on many of the traditions of the modern Olympics, its exclusion of all non-Irish peoples, while understandable in the context of recently achieved national freedom, produced a sporting festival that was essentially a celebration of a single ethnic group. The countries that competed were the same ones that did so in 1928 and 1932 in Tailteann Games, most part of the British Empire. The biggest threat of upsetting the events on the day of the opening ceremony did not come from Republicans, but from municipal strikers who paraded on O'Connell Street, no longer officially known as Sackville Street, in 1924 in the morning. We spoke about the municipal strikers last week with the Dublin Corporation dissolution. Large crowds gathered in the streets of Dublin from noon to view the grand parade of industrial exhibits, which started at St. Stephen's Green on its tour of the principal streets of the city. Luckily for Walsh and the other organisers, it was a glorious day weather-wise. According to the Irish News, in the vast throng were visitors from practically every part of the world, men and women distinguished in art, science, literature and industry. All Ireland seemed to be represented. Thousands were arriving from early morning at the various railway termini, while there was also a great influx of visitors by cross-channel steamer. About 4,000 arrived at Dún Laoghaire on Saturday morning, making a total of 26,000 for the month. At the opening banquet at the Hotel Metropole, W.B. Yeats, who had won the Nobel Prize for Literature the previous November, and who was the chair of the Éineacht Distinguished Visitors Committee, stated that the holding of the Tailteann Games was a symbolic coming of age for the Free State, saying the nation is, as it were, a young man just entering upon its prosperity, of whom it is impossible to say whether he is a wise man or a fool, whether he will enlarge his estate or be a mere spendthrift. He is celebrating his coming of age and asks the goodwill of his neighbours. Out of a period of terror, strained hearts, and tragic incident, we are reverting to normality. Some were not happy with Yates' involvement with the Tailteann Games, with the leader newspaper stating, "The West Briton Yates presided. Why was not a real Gael chosen, someone who could speak for the historic Irish nation?" The opening banquet was attended by guests and dignitaries from the various competing national teams. Due to the ongoing municipal workers' strike, there was no electricity in the Metropole Hotel, so candles and lamps had to be used. The main event of the opening ceremony was held in Croke Park, where it's estimated that 20,000 people were in attendance. There, J.J. Walsh formally opened the Games. The Governor-General, Tim Healy, was also present, who later described the Tailteann Games as a great success, as well as prominent TDs, officials of the state and the army, as well as foreign dignitaries. And here is Healy with the Prince Mirza Reza Khan, head of the Persian delegation. There's quite a thrill when shortly before 3 o'clock, a fleet of 4 aeroplanes flew over the enclosure and began executing spiral nosedives. To marry the ancient with the modern, the actress Nancy Rock appeared at the opening ceremony dressed as Queen Tailteann. There were men and women wearing ancient costumes, with some walking wolfhounds, one of the most enduring images of the Games. The clothes and jewellery of Queen Tailteann were rich in Celtic symbolism, showing that ancient clothing was filtered through to the 1920s, as Louise Ryan has pointed out. Queen Tailteann also wore high heels and headgear popular at the time. There was a deep irony at play, though, as Queen Tailteann, a Spanish otherworldly goddess, a figure from Celtic pagan royalty, saluted members of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, who no doubt greeted her back. The opening ceremony in Croke Park began with a triumphal and symbolic entry into the stadium of Queen Tailteann and her court. Following Tailteann, in the style of the opening ceremony of the modern Games, paraded the athletes from all the competing nations. And here we have images here. As you can see, there was actually a massive programme of sporting and cultural events for the Tailteann Games, which lasted from Saturday 2nd to Monday 18th of August. A wide variety of venues were used in Dublin and on its outskirts, in Bray, for example. Naturally, hurling and Gaelic football matches were played in Croke Park, where international and provincial competitions were played. In one of the few sports women participated in, camogie was played in Bray and Terenure. Handball contests were held in Ballymun and Clondalkin. Billiards was held in the Catholic Club on O'Connell Street, and boxing was held in Portobello. Yachting took place off the coast at Dunleary, and rowing took place on the Liffey at Island Bridge. Leopardstown Racecourse was used for clay pigeon shooting, and Fitzwilliam Club for tennis matches. Golf was split between Dollymount and the Heritage, while gymnastics was divided between Croke Park and Balls Bridge. Balls Bridge was also used for tug-of-war contests, as was the international steeplechase. Most athletic and cycling events were held in Croke Park, though. The marathon was ran from Navan in County Meath to Croke Park. The international archery competition was held at Lord Ivy's grounds. Some of the most popular events were held in the Phoenix Park. The swimming contests were held in Dublin Zoo, and motorcycling and aerial races were also held in the Phoenix Park. As Mike Cronin has written, the 1920s fascination with speed and danger was demonstrated by the inclusion in the programme of motorcycle, speedboat and aeroplane races, events that could hardly be considered to possess any traditional Celtic virtues or heritage. Even though the Tailteann Games were largely meant to be a celebration of Ireland's ancient past, it was the appeal of modern life and new technologies, of American and European glamour and invention, that attracted by far the largest crowds who flocked to the Phoenix Park to see the motorcycling and air racing. It is estimated that a crowd of over 40,000 alone watched the motorcycle races. Some of the other sports did not attract anywhere near those attendances, with employers blamed by some for not allowing their employees off to watch the events held during the week. Only 100 people watched the camogie medal match, for example, while the billiards tournament at the Catholic Club in O'Connell Street rarely attracted more than 12 people. Although with matches averaging 14 hours in duration, that is somewhat understandable. There was a large international dimension to the Games, with some who had competed in the Paris Olympics also taking part in the Tailteann Games. It is important to note, though, the US Olympic team, for example, sent its athletes to several European countries after the Paris Olympics, including Ireland. As mentioned above, among the 5,000 Tailteann Games competitors were 6 gold medalists from Paris, 23 medal winners in all. They included Jackson Schultz, who won gold in the 200 metres race in Paris, but came second to Britain's Harold Abrahams in the 100 metres, a race that still remains famous through the movie The Chariots of Fire. Another American high jump gold medalist, Harold Osborne, in Paris, also came to Dublin, and he's seen here competing in Croke Park. Nick Winter, the Australian winner of the triple jump gold medal at the Olympics, competed in the Tailteann Games too. The most famous competitor, of course, as we mentioned above, well, subsequently that is, was Johnny Weissmuller. Although he reached international stardom as a Hollywood actor playing Tarzan in the 1930s, he was well known in 1924 too for his swimming exploits. He was the most decorated Olympian at the Tailteann Games and a multiple world record holder. He won 3 gold medals at the Paris Olympics, 2 more in Amsterdam 4 years later, and a bronze medal on the American water polo team. As there was no proper swimming pool in Dublin, the pond in Dublin Zoo was repurposed to host the swimming competitions. Weissmuller won gold in the Tailteann Games there as well. Gold medals were handed out for some sports at the Games, with gold-plated medals having to suffice for other events. The medals were designed by Oliver Shepherd. The Irish had the biggest team with 39 athletes, USA 20, England 18, Australia 9, Canada 6, Scotland 3, while Wales, New Zealand and South Africa only had a single entrant each. The USA finished in first place with 14.5 winners, Ireland in second with 6.5, and Australia in third place with 5. Coinciding with the sporting events, which in some ways overshadowed all else, were the many cultural events that took place as part of the Tailteann Festival. Yates was involved in organising the cultural programme and for inviting distinguished guests. Although he was turned down by James Joyce and Ezra Pound, many high-profile dignitaries did attend, including the cricketers Jam Shahib of Nawanangur and C.B. Fry, Sir John and Lady Lavery, Sir Edwin and Lady Lutyens, and Francis Hackett. At his garden party, hosted by Oliver St. John Gogarty during the Tailteann Games, are seated Yates, Compton Mackenzie, Augustus John, and Edwin Lutyens. Standing are G.K. Chesterton, James Stephens, and Lennox Robinson. The one competition of the Tailteann Games that did go ahead in 1922 during the Civil War, as mentioned above, was the art competition in the RDS in Ballsbridge. In 1924, there were 1,597 art entries, described by Mike Cronin as a bloated multi-category event with no restrictions. There were 32 categories in painting, drawing, pottery, etc. Sir John Lavery was the overall adjudicator. The standout artists were Harry Clark and Sean Keating. Sean Keating was the overall winner for his painting, Homage to Hugh Lane. Unlike the sporting contests, which were generally well received, the art competition was not considered a success by many, with too many entries of average quality on show. Overall, the first Tailteann Games was considered a triumph by most, with Walsh receiving many plaudits. And here's a firework display at Croke Park as part of the closing ceremony. Although it did not make a profit, the losses were manageable, and it attracted a lot of tourists to Dublin, as well as a high degree of goodwill. The lukewarm commitment of the government gnawed at Walsh, who was constantly battling with Ernest Blythe's finance department for adequate funding. The 1928 Tailteann Games were held along similar lines, with a similar programme to 1924 Games, but the press was not as enthusiastic, nor were the spectators, who did not turn up in large numbers. Huge crowds turned up for the motorcycling race in the Phoenix Park, though with it estimated that over 100,000 people were there. Absent too were government ministers from the opening ceremony. As with 1924, it took place immediately after the 1928 Amsterdam Olympic Games, but again the quality and number of athletes was below that which competed in 1924. The final games in 1932, as it transpired, were originally meant to take place in 1931 due to the 1932 Olympic Games being held in Los Angeles, which would make it very difficult to attract top-class international athletes. The decision was overruled, and the Games took place in July 1932, coinciding with the Eucharistic Congress taking place at the same time. With Olympians, including Irish ones, on their way to Los Angeles, it did not attract top-class athletes. There was also a new government in office. Eamon de Valera's Fianna Fáil were in power for the first time and were acutely aware they inherited an event organised by their predecessors, their old Civil War foes. The shortened event to 1 week was upstaged by the Eucharistic Congress, and unsurprisingly the Games made a loss, albeit a small one, but with unpaid loans from the previous Games, it was decided to bring the venture to an end. But while only held on 3 occasions, the Tailteann Games were remarkable events and hugely ambitious spectacles. The 1924 Games in particular did project a positive image of Ireland to the world, an image badly needed at the time, given the turmoil the country experienced immediately preceding the Games. That's it, so from books you can read. Well, 2 you can read now and 1 in the future. So Sport in Ireland by Paul Rouse does actually go into great detail about Tailteann Games, and that book I mentioned before by T.H. Nally, which I actually bought it online. It's really cheap online, actually, that T.H. Nally book on the ancient games. It's a very slight book, but it does give some detail of the games and centuries of old. And the next book you can't get yet. I don't know when you're going to get it, but I've been working on it for years with John Crowley and Mike Cronin and Charlie Roach, the Atlas of Irish Sport. We've got a couple of entries on the Tailteann Games. We're hoping to be out next year, but I'm not going to make any promises of that yet. But it's going to be out sometime anyway, and it's going to be a big and great book.